I'd like to call this Council and Budget Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
Thank you. There are no announcements, no addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? If not, then I'm going to hand the chair over to the Budget Chair, Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one change before we get started. So we're going to, tonight we'll do the presentation of the library first, and we'll deal with that report directly after that, so we don't take Jonathan's thunder away from him, because I know it's going to be riveting tonight. So at this point, we'll invite Craig Schupelt, the CAO at the Port Erie Library, to come forward with his presentation. Mr. Schupelt. You've never looked better, Mr. Schupelt.
CEO, Craig Schupelt, and he's going to make the actual budget presentation to you. But I just wanted to personally thank you for allowing us to do this. And without further ado, Mr. Schupelt.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to say it's good to be back presenting in person. It's been a few years, so it's great to be not on Zoom tonight. So as Jerry said, I will be doing the presentation, which I'm assuming. All right, you're all set. Thank you. So we're looking at our budget, library budget 2023 to 2025, with the focus really on 2023. I'm going to talk briefly about some 2022 highlights, but again, I'll keep that brief as I know you want to focus on the budget and the looking forward part. Perhaps at some point during the year when some more things are happening, we can come back and kind of give an update on what's going on at the library. So we did have some highlights coming back out of the pandemic. The first and probably the most important achievement is the second one that's listed there, which is the returning to full services. This includes all of our previous programming, meeting space, other services, public seating. I'm also quite proud that we were always, throughout the return to normal, at or very near the front in terms of all Niagara area libraries, expanding hours, expanding services. We were always, if not the first, certainly within the first few for every time. We have created a couple of study rooms, Zoom rooms, I call them, at the Centennial branch, and I've got a couple of pictures I'll show. And as I mentioned again, people coming back to the library. Total attendance for kids programs this year was over 3,000. We also had 800 people attend adult programs. We've got 5 active book clubs now, and a homework help program that had 1,100 child visits during the year. One more slide about our highlights. The biggest achievement in terms of what I'd call a board achievement was the elimination of library fines, which took effect January 1st, 2022. We did a lot of studying of library fines, saw that they were a declining revenue source with people using e-materials, with people getting notices that items were due. We looked at what other libraries were doing. Toronto, Ottawa, Winnipeg, a lot of mid-sized libraries had gone that way. We presented to the board and they made that decision, which I think has been great. We had a lot of patrons, more than you'd maybe think, because some of us are quite fortunate that owing $10 or $15 is not a big deal. For other people, owing that money was a barrier, meant they were never coming back to the library. And eliminating those and getting rid of some of those fines retrospectively has made a big difference. So our circulation is back close to our pre-pandemic numbers, and I'll touch on that in a slide as well. And our meeting room policy, especially related to charging people for the meeting rooms, has been relaxed in an effort to draw more visitors into the library. We've seen an increase in people using the room, and it's allowed more outside groups to use it. We're seeing people in the library who may have not been in there before. excuse me, as I mentioned, our circulation, I'm sorry, and I think this might be missing a couple of pictures, but it's okay, I can live without the pictures. I just want to see something. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Let me just go back to this. Yeah, I'm sorry. I had some pictures of the study rooms and the meeting rooms that I was talking about. I apologize. They were nice because you can see it's such an enormous difference. I'll send them out to people just because I like kind of showing it off. But the meeting room, for those of you who remember, it was a large space with a temporary wall that could be pulled, carpeted space. We put a permanent wall in, made 2 rooms out of it, new flooring, new blinds, new paint. It's like, it's barely recognizable. And again, the old boardroom, which had seen much better days, is now 2 study or Zoom rooms. We call it a blue room and a green room because it's the color of the carpets in there. Space for 4 or 5 people to sit, have studies, doing studying, having meetings, and both of them have large televisions with Wi-Fi access, so you can hook up, you can do Zoom meetings or whatever, Teams, whatever you'd like to do. So they are being utilized very heavily. So again, I'll send pictures because I wanted to show those ones off, so apologize for that. So getting into or actually, you know what, I'm sorry, I'll just speak to this annual circulation. So as I said, you can see it's pretty clear. Last year, we're back over 160,000 items circulated. We saw a huge dip in 2020 because we were closed for a significant portion. Started to come back in 2021, but the difference between 2021 and 2022 was slightly over 20,000. And we're at about 93% of our pre-pandemic numbers in terms of circulation. We're trending in the right direction. And I know it's very early, but I know, having just done my January statistics, that we were up in January 2023 as compared to last year. So it's pretty exciting. So moving into this budget, we're looking right now at what do I call our budget priorities. I have the same slide. I think I've probably had the same slide for 10 years. It's really just what I always consider kind of our fixed costs at the library, things we're committed to for the next year. Staff wages and benefits, by far the largest portion, 71%. It's always been 70 to 73 in my time here, because we are a service, and that's where it's going. We do have some preventative maintenance contracts. I'm sure, like everyone else, the snow removal has been the unforeseen super high expense over the past couple of years, and the most unpredictable of those. I believe I had sent this document as well out to council in advance of the meeting, but this is our 2022 budget summary, kind of a snapshot of our projected year end. And I just say projected because we still have some expenses trickling in, some materials that were ordered later in the year that are still coming in, and a few other things. So we're looking at a surplus of about $89,000. As every time we've run a surplus, not surprisingly, it's in the staffing, because again, that's 70% of what we're looking at. This year we had a staff member, unfortunately, on long-term disability for more than half of the year. We had some gapping due to a maternity leave. And we did have a retirement of my longtime business administrator, which we didn't replace that position, but we made it part-time. That also allowed us, for the first time since I've been here, and probably I think in 20 years, to hire an on-site library maintenance employee part-time, which has made a huge difference just for general cleanliness and fixing up of small things in the library that you just don't take for granted. So that's been really good. Our goals and objectives for 2023, we do have some new and existing capital projects that I'll speak to in a little more detail towards the end of my presentation. The increased programming for all ages, as I'd mentioned, we had, when you add in homework help, we had over 5,000 people come to programs and the homework help program in 2022. So we have increased the spending in that area pretty significantly. Adult programming has been a surprisingly huge growth area, especially coming out. People really seem to be wanting to get out, and we're really trying to focus a lot on the content creation, DIY stuff. That's what people want. They want to come in and do something, do something or make something, and have that social aspect to it as well. So that's been, like I said, a big growth. We need to do some building plans for Crystal Ridge and Stevensville, especially for Crystal Ridge, and again, I'll talk about that a little bit. And we're looking at adding a day of service at Stevensville. Pre-pandemic, they were open, they had more hours. Those were reduced during the pandemic, and while we've brought them back, we're still a day short out there. That will be discussed and hopefully approved at my board meeting next week to start in May. The other problem right now, as I see it in Stevensville, is our service hours are 2 mornings and an afternoon. So if you get home after 5 o'clock, the only library service available to you means driving into Ridgeway or driving into Fort Erie, and it's not fair, especially to an area where we're also seeing growth. So getting into the dollars, our 2023 budget request is the $1,614,976, 1.9% or just under $19,000 in terms of an increase from last year. The development charges request of $20,000 is actually slightly less than the $30,000 we've been getting for the past few years. The reason for that is that the development charges are to be used for growth. Specifically in libraries, it's for the growth of our catalog, our collection. And right now, we're kind of in the middle of revamping our whole collection, doing a lot of weeding this year, doing a lot of rethinking of where we want to go with that. I don't think it would be fair to keep asking for more until we know where we're going with that in terms of the growth. Our supplementary revenue items, the largest of these is always the provincial operating grant, which has been the $60,682 for, well, since I've been here in 2011 and for a long time before that. We're always a little bit disappointed that the province won't take a look at a per capita funding model that grows with cost of living or inflation. At the same time, we're somewhat grateful that we still have the $60,682 because there was talk a few years ago of possibly eliminating that or looking at something that would greatly reduce it. I mentioned that we did eliminate fines, and we still get some funds back. It says fines, but really when it says fines, so that's the recovery of costs of lost materials that we're looking at. And then fees and rentals. Rentals are small. Fees would be things like scanning, copying, that kind of stuff. And again, we're not looking at a contribution from our reserve this year, which is great. This is a 3-year snapshot of our expected budget. And again, every year when I say this, when I do this presentation, I say that the numbers for 2024 and 2025 are extremely tentative, the 2.8 and the 2.6. Certainly we would always be looking to lower those if we could, always trying to stay aligned with whatever guidance that we are given by the town. The 2025 is the more difficult one to predict because just as with the town, our collective agreement will expire at the end of 2024, so we have no idea what to expect in terms of a wage increase in 2025. And again, given that that's 3/4 of our budget, that's going to have a significant impact one way or the other when that's decided. The next 2 slides are just comparisons that I like to do to kind of show where we sit in comparison to other libraries in the region of similar sizes. This is the per capita funding. Again, these numbers are 2021. They're always a year behind on collating this data. Right now, we are 3rd behind Pelham and Lincoln. And again, I think I started doing this slide probably 2015, after I'd been here for a few years, just started trying to do more of these comparisons. We've never been towards the right side of this, the right side of this slide, which is great. I always like to see us on the left. I think it shows that we are getting financial support, which I think is, and I think we do well with it, which I think this next slide shows. It ties in nicely to it. So although we're 3rd in per capita funding, we still maintain the highest number of service hours per week over the last year, quite significantly, actually over almost about 30 hours more than Lincoln. Unfairly, this will change in 2023 because Lincoln Pelham is now a single system effective January 1st. So now their hours are going to be a big bar. They're going to be across there. So, but the per capita funding for each library was already higher than ours before that. So this is kind of our financial standing at the end of the year. The operating is really just the expected surplus of $89,000. It's likely there will be a little bit more than that in there. We have some things like HST recovery and stuff that will trickle in that will bump up that balance as well. We have this operating reserve of $46,000 we created several years ago just as a backup in case we ran into some unexpected, unforeseen problems during the year. Fortunately, because of the support we've not had to do anything with that since then. And our capital reserve currently $143,579. And again, the next two slides, I'm just going to speak to what we plan to do with some of this money, because if you look at the 89, which we would ideally transfer over to the reserve, that will give us about $230,000 with which to complete some capital projects. So, two slides. This is what I'll finish with, just talking about where we want to go. So we've got, as I said, the building plan for Crystal Ridge. There's also going to be one for Stevensville. Stevensville has some more immediate needs we'd like to take care of as well. But both buildings are showing their age. Crystal Ridge probably needs a complete revamp at some point. I don't know what that would look like in terms of cost, but we'll get a designer in. We'll look at we'll get a study done, and we'll see what happens and see what that means in terms of a possible capital ask for the future, which we don't always like to do, but sometimes it's necessary. So we'll see what comes out of that. Shelving and seating at Stevensville. We've started doing some weeding out there. The shelves are far too tall. Something we need to remedy this year, and we need to get some more comfortable seating out there. Again, we're expanding the hours. We're trying to get people in there, and I think the shelving and seating would go a long way towards that. And completing the carpeting and furnishings at Centennial is really the last step in complete renovations for that branch, at least for the public-facing side. The staff will keep using our old chairs and desks for now, but we can at least finish making it a little nicer for the public. The children's area, the entryway, the whole front side of the library is done. The back half, there's not a lot of new furniture that needs to be done, some carpeting and some new shelving. So we want to get that done by the end of 2023. And the makerspace, we've been purchasing equipment for makerspace probably for 4 or 5 years. We had something we thought was ready to go, and then like everything else, March break 2020 came, and that was when we had to close. And we've done all the renovations, and now we're just trying to figure out where we want to put all of these things. We'd originally planned, as I said, we had the meeting room, we made it into 2 rooms, and we thought the smaller space was going to become the maker space. Unfortunately, it's a perfect meeting space, and everybody wants to use it all the time. So now I feel like we can't put this in there because we're giving up an awesome meeting space. So we're looking at a couple of other options there. We have a lot of equipment, and we plan on buying more this year. And finally, I just said addition of generators. We actually have a small generator at the Crystal Ridge branch that powers very, very little. I think, from our budget perspective, getting a whole building generator for Centennial is likely a bit of a pipe dream at this point, just because you're talking about 3 HVAC units. There's a lot that needs to be kept on there. But we're looking at doing something to keep that place going, at least getting some heat to the main part of the library, or cooling to that main part of the library. In the summer, we see a lot of people come in and use this as a de facto cooling center. We have water. Oftentimes we'll have fruit and other snacks for people. And I think that, especially in the north end, where we're kind of more centrally located, I think it's a great place for people, and maybe as a gathering spot as well, right? And I think even from the terrible storm, I thought it would have been nice if we had that. Not that people could have got to the doors, but if they could have got to the doors and we had the generator, they could have come in. So that's, again, that's a big one. I know they are not cheap, but that's something that we are looking at for this year. So again, that's how we would like to spend the surplus that we've kept this year, along with the existing capital reserve. So, and I think that's it for me. Again, I wanted to keep it brief, and obviously Councillor McDermott will be open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Schufelt. Any comments or questions with regards to Mr. Schufelt's presentation? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Thank you for your presentation and all the hard work you and your staff do throughout the year. I only hear positive things about the library services, so congratulations. In regards to the Zoom rooms, if someone needs to have a meeting with somebody through Zoom, can they go there and can they reserve it or something like that? And do they pay for that?
Yeah, through Councillor McDermott. Yes, to Councillor Noyes, they can be reserved. They're open from the time the library is open. We keep them generally open during the day because we don't want anybody to feel like they can't use the room. But we do have people that say exactly what you're saying. Somebody had to do court testimony, essentially. And they said, I need it on Tuesday at whatever time. Can I come in? And absolutely, they can reserve it, and there's no charge for any of that.
Thank you.
Anything further? Your worship.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the fiscal prudence. I'm really fascinated by this elimination of library fines. Can you collect money that you've paid in the past? My question really, Chair, is directed to, I know that people that would develop large fines might be inclined not to even return to the library, so you'd maybe lose the book. How is this new system going to work in terms of people who maybe aren't going to bring a book back?
Mr. Schubel.
Sure, through Councillor McDermott, to your worship. I guess it's similar to referencing a really old model when Blockbuster Video, for those who remember, eliminated fines on your overdue VHS cassettes. After a certain period, you just owned it, and you would be charged the replacement cost. So we encourage people to bring them back. We give them lots of time. We give them 3 months to bring the item back, and at which point it would go lost.
So if I might share then, so you simply send an invoice then for the cost of the book?
Yes, after sending out several notices beforehand. Yeah.
But I suppose if there's no fine, there's really no reason why a person wouldn't bring a book back.
And I know that, again, when we looked at I believe it was Richmond Hill had done a really comprehensive study on the impact of removing fines and what it would mean to people returning materials. And I know there were fears among staff, and I think it's natural that we're limiting fines. That means nobody's going to bring that book back until they absolutely have to before they get charged. But it showed the behavior was almost the opposite. People were felt more responsible because they weren't paying fines.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Schubel.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Thanks.
So we're going to move right to the report. Who would like to move CBC 04-2023? Councillor Dubanow. Are there any comments or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to extend my appreciation to Jerry and Craig for the work, that the entire board, all the staff there. I've been very fortunate to serve as both the council representative during my last term at council, and also as a citizen prior to my time on council. And I see the work that they do and the effort and the value we get for the money that we invest into the library. If you haven't been to the Centennial branch, the renovations happened like just as COVID was starting. So, maybe individuals haven't gotten out yet, but if you haven't got there and you haven't seen the work, especially the children's area, those two, the green and the blue rooms, it's just a completely different space. It's very open, very comfortable. There's always people sitting in there doing things. We're very fortunate that we have the leadership we do at the library, the staff, and I'll be supporting this, and I look forward to the service they continue to provide to the community there. I know I say this every year when this comes up at budget, but I think it's important to say, Mr. Chair. That's why I'm saying it again. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Councillor Christensen?
I told Mr. Schufelt when I first met him that librarians run in my sister's a librarian, though a long way away. Also that I was fortunate to grow up in a small town where a very, very small library contributed greatly to my education as someone coming from a not very well-off family. And I think that the quality of the libraries in Fort Erie speaks to the commitment to learning, to managing information, and teaching people how to manage it for themselves. So I certainly will support this.
Anyone else? No, I have to agree as well. I've been a member of the library board for a number of years, and I know that when Mr. Schufelt came, when he came into office, he had to fulfill some pretty big shoes, which he's done quite well. And out of all the funders that this council funds, I think I could say probably with assurance that they're probably the best people to deal with when they bring their budgets forward. So, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Fasten your seatbelts, because the show is about to begin. Mr. Jansen?
Well, you know how to set the stage, eh, George? We were cautioning earlier that we had pasta tonight, so I'm going to blame any nodding off on that. But no, let's dive in. Thanks, everyone, for being here for the last, hopefully, budget meeting for 2023 for the town, the levy budget. The presentation, as well as all the reports and memos and supporting information that's provided to council, is on our town website under government, budgets and finances, and then budget info is at the very bottom of that page. There's a number of links that are usable within the presentation if you want to go and find some of the background to what we're talking about, or some of the discussion and greater analysis from council reports and so on. Just a brief note, thank you to Craig and for the library board and their presentation tonight. We have a great working relationship with them, and it's always good to share this meeting with them. So for our presentation, it is somewhat similar to prior years as well, where we'll take a brief look at last year and some of our results and what how the budget was shaped and looked last year. Before going into our budget for this year, we'll describe some of these components as we move through them, but ultimately moving through all of the impacts for the 23 budget, and then displaying or showing that for the consolidated median household in Fort Erie. And we'll look ahead at some risks and opportunities and forecasting. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll open up for questions. And after that, then we will go one by one through the supplementary items that we'll summarize here as well. So some of the background, of course, this is a year with a new council. So the strategic plan is coming to an end. We're looking forward to working together with council in setting those new priorities and directions and related initiatives. So this one's still, we're in a bit of a in-between land where we're presenting it based on existing strategy. Clearly, we've had enough meetings already together and have had a lot of input in many different ways from council to be setting some new direction. I would just note too, what we typically do is bring forward our prior year's surplus and annual audited statements in the middle of the year, sometime in summer likely, following the audit. And that, at this point, with a projected surplus, will allow council to consider some other strategic areas as well. For the long-term financial planning, certainly one of the themes of this year, which is not unique to Fort Erie, is managing both the financial sustainability needs of the town with the affordability pressures. So in a rapidly increasing inflationary environment with rapidly changing interest rates, that means different things for different people, but certainly we know that we're one of many pressures that our citizens will have, we will all be experiencing this year in relation to affordability. Budget planning, we did bring forward a report in October that set out the timetable and some of the pressures we were identifying at that point, some of which were based on last year's forecasts, including a 7.6% consumer price index, which we've traditionally used on a historical rate that's been experienced within the last year, so that there always is some elements with some areas of catch up with that, but that is the rate that we do reference for that. And then just with budget planning, just to note, this is a very broad process that continues throughout the year in many different ways. Big thanks to all of our staff who contribute in many ways to this, but throughout the year, there's many elements of planning, approval, executing and evaluating. So evaluating at the end of that would be with some of our variance reporting that we bring to council to advise you of how the budget is progressing. And then we do report to Corporate Services Subcommittee in different ways, and we will have discussions from time to time to see where we see the budget going and how that might be guided. So last year's budget, if we look at all three, and tonight, of course, is the last piece with that top circle, but it's a combination of $83 million in approvals for spending from the 22 budget. The largest is the levy, but then as well the capital of 23 and the water and wastewater of $21 million. And just a link there as well for our annual budget book. It's a lot of information, but certainly we don't expect a presentation like this tonight to capture a lot of the detail that would be supporting this. So there's many, I think it's a couple hundred pages probably at this point of documentation and background, some of which is reporting as well on financial indicators with how we compare within the province. So the 22, this is just by way of comparison for what we'll present for 23, but expenses were across these key different functional areas. Some of them align with our departments, some of them are more broader, and most of them are designed to then provide better comparison within the province with annual benchmarking. And then in particular in a year such as this, when there's changes that we'll be discussing between or the line items of the tax bill, between the town and those that are requisitioned and sent to the region, the total amounts we're collecting on our town letterhead, as we say, last year was $68.7 million, 44% of which was the town, 43% to the region of Niagara, and 12% to the province. And just we highlight some of the typical or larger services for each one of those there. Just to know off the top, the provincial education amount the rate has been held the same this year for year over year. So the tax calculation for when we ultimately come up with the town's budget needs, determining how that is allocated or assigned to different taxpayers. This is an overview of some of those calculations where ultimately a property owner will pay the tax rate, which is weighted based on different property types. So residential has a factor of 1, commercial and industrial and some other tax property classes will have different rates that attract a higher, or in the case of farmlands and some others, a lower rate than the residential rate. Everything we present for town, based on the largest component being residential, is for the residential tax rate though. And as you've seen in our January 18th presentation on our water wastewater, we do reference the BMA study, which is an annual study of all municipalities. And in the case of taxes, we've always held to comparing a like property for ease of comparison. And so we again focus on the residential and the graphs that I'll show you, but certainly in all other classification areas, we compare favorably to all other municipalities being in the bottom 1, 2, or 3 rated tax levels of all Niagara municipalities. So this is one you haven't seen. This is just pulls out the tax component from the most recently released report, which would have been back in December of 2022, so just a couple months ago. And we have compressed the graph there, but you can see, and this is great news for this last year, where Fort Erie in the comparative municipalities is the lowest for that comparative property type. And you can see some of the others there. And then looking at the municipal burden, this is the one that you have seen recently. This is a better picture in many ways, as it's comparing the total amounts that the town bills to its customers or taxpayers, in that there's some variation, we always say, in the way that municipalities attribute costs between those two large budgets. So when you look at the total picture, there's nowhere for your expenses to go, but to your customers where the need is there. And so this is how we compare. We have moved lower in that graph consistently over the last 5 or 6 years. No movement this year. There is a gap between the lower 3 there, I would say, we could discuss a number of differences in the challenges and opportunities for those municipalities compared to ours, but certainly we've been pleased to see our position move down over the years. So for 2022 performance, we do try and have this meeting as early in the year as possible while also still having the opportunity to see some of our prior year actual results coming in. You'll see one of the themes these days with our operations is a focus more on modernization. So our hope is that as our systems improve and as we do more work to have efficiencies with our financial reporting, in particular with our ERP, that we'll be able to increase our timelines with that. But certainly right now there's a lot of work to review outstanding projects, those areas that are unspent and are available to be encumbered, or the funding related to it moved into the future into 2023. We are projecting a surplus in accordance with what we brought to council back in the third quarter. There's a few considerations that we'll be looking at which may impact that, one of which is funding the exemptions that are written into our DC, or our development charge bylaw. So that will change as we get closer, but we expect it to be between, if those DC fundings are approved, around the $1 million mark. So just some comments on some of the other items we do throughout the year to provide financial stewardship and accountability with our audit, the annual report, as I mentioned earlier. You can see a link to last year's for similarities or comparison. And then just highlighting some of our opening based on estimates, unaudited of course, but balances for 2023 with our levy debt being $1.6 million, which compares very low. It's low risk and very much below provincial and local comparators. Our levels of reserves, both for operating, which has a number of different needs, be it this most recent year for election needs, or for putting towards grants towards external agencies like our hospital. Areas like that. Emergency management was used to coordinate some of the funding we received during the pandemic. And then the $20 million is their capital needs, which we would have discussed at our meeting back on December 7th with $8.7 million in annual contributions for that. Oops. This is some of the metrics I was indicating earlier, both sustainability and flexibility. And I'd be happy to talk later about any one of these, but granted, it does show that Fort Erie is performing well against our comparators in all areas, except one, that being amortization, where in that case, the age of our assets would be the particular driver of why our amortization costs are a little bit higher than others. That means that some municipalities are younger and have a newer infrastructure and therefore less amortization. So the way we structure the presentation of our budget is to say we have our base budget, which is items that were previously approved and support the ongoing activities of the corporation. And we just highlight some of the key drivers, much like Craig was showing and describing for the library. And then for that, we are going to be presenting for 23 an overall base budget change of a decrease of 0.82%, which is a base budget increase of 0.79 less, and it captures the assessment growth. That's all less than the CS16 budget planning report that was prepared back in October. Again, this is structure for how we present. I won't go into this in much detail, but the report for tonight on tonight's e-agenda under February 15th does show on Appendix 1 the highlights to all the base budget changes as well as each supplementary item. And then the budget package, which is immediately below that link on the e-agenda, includes Section 7, which is all of the base budgets for each departmental and divisional area. And we do provide the year-to-date 2022, of course, again, that's unaudited actual results with the last year's approved budget, as well as the 23, the 24, and the 25 forecasts. and for these defined areas. So if this is based on Appendix 1, and Appendix 1 I think is helpful to have in front of you in terms of seeing across a number of columns. We have the 5 columns that show not only the dollar impact to the town's budget, the percentage impact of the budget, then as well the impact for the median, again the residential median household, and then the total tax bill, as well as the dollar change for the total tax bill. So just to highlight some of these, most of which, or I think all of which, are in Appendix 1. Some of these have been combined together, I believe. But there is, and just to explain as well, the positives and brackets, I'm sure we've all been confused by accountants in the past with what is a bracketed item. Anyway, so in this case, a decrease is a negative, or sorry, is a positive. And in this case, the first one off the top is an example where our grant from the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund is decreasing. So that is actually adding to the budget and adding budget pressures. And then increases in revenues, at least this page's revenues, are welcomed, and they are negative, so they're decreasing the amount of levy we need to raise. So here you see a number that are highlighted for changes. Building and planning fees, we are increasing. We've had, I think, a continuous run of many years in increasing that and trying to capture all of the strong development activity going on in the town. There's some expectation that there will be changes, as we're seeing in many different areas in the markets with the rate of development, but certainly on the policy side, there's no letting off with moving ahead as much as possible, but we are seeing some leveling off, or expecting some leveling off. So the building and planning fees have been increased $87,000. Beach admissions were more conservative in the last few years, of course, with COVID, so those are being returned to forecasted levels based on trends. Our net tax adjustments, so that during the year the town receives additional tax revenues or supplemental taxes, but we're also writing off taxes as assessments are appealed or other adjustments are occurring. So that is also to the town's net benefit, with an increase of $150,000. And certainly that relates to information that Jillian has authored and prepared in Report CBC 05. The bank and investment income, this is an example where I was referring earlier to some of the opportunities and threats of rising interest rates. So to the extent that we have healthy cash flow and cash balances with investments, we are projecting a larger increase with a $443,000. The Bank of Canada, of course, had a record number of rate increases this last year, so that's another area that contributed to our overall net surplus last year as well. So that's a bit of a catch-up in that area. And then all other non-tax revenue, including user fees, is an increase in revenue of about $204,000. Graphically here you can see the percentages and amounts for each of the revenue by source. So the tax levy is 78%, and then some of the others, such as user fees at 9% and grants at 5%, and how that contributes to our needs. So then similarly with expenses, just a summary of some of the items in Appendix 1, increases of just under $1.2 million, including our statutory requirements in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement for wages and benefits. And benefits in particular is a stronger driver of the costs with the health and dental and other rates that we're seeing for 2023. Then the next line, I've broken out some of the specific other wage and benefit components, some of which town would have seen throughout the year, such as Report CAO 14, which approved a few changes to staffing composition. It includes anything that was approved in last year's budget that's now being phased in for a full 12 months. OMERS, there's new legislation that allows non-full-time employees to be eligible for pension benefits, so that we're capturing some of the impacts there. There's a larger than expected WSIB rate change as well. The next one is reserve contribution, so including two here. We're removing the $150,000 contribution to the hospital reserve. So back in 2013, the town had foresight to create a reserve for the South Niagara Hospital and contribute to that. So happy to say that with this budget, we will have fully funded that commitment to the hospital. So we're able to now remove that annual contribution. And as well, an offset to that is we're increasing based on need we've seen in the community and based even on recent reports that came on Monday for physician attraction. We're increasing the community health reserve contribution by $20,000. Capital is what was put forward in our capital budget, noting that it's very important on the sustainability side that we not lose too much ground. We've met our infrastructure gap. However, that is slipping away with inflation pressures. So this is a strong effort still to balance affordability and sustainability, to still give the 7.6% CPI factor, even though, again, it's much lower than construction pressures. But to increase that. So that is one of the larger pieces of the budget as well. We have a new PPLS system, which in your report explains that's a permitting, planning, and licensing system that our planning department is using to help make their operations more efficient. It also does take advantage of some grants. So we're happy to see that move into production and also benefit from leveraging some external funding. Insurance is a pressure again this year. I know we noted that, I think probably the last couple of years, but there's been exceptional pressure, particularly in the municipal environment with insurance. So that increase is captured there. And then one of the key themes of this budget is the change with the effective of January 1st of this year, the creation of the Niagara Transit Commission. So the transit services are being removed from our budget. We've tried to make that clear throughout the reports and in this presentation as well, that we're benefiting from the removal of those services. And the amount there is $1.1 million, net of some of the fare revenue we received and also grant revenues with the provincial gas tax. However, that is coming back to all of the Niagara taxpayers in the form of a special levy. The requisition will be to the Niagara Region, but it'll be the Niagara Transit Commission itself that will be operating that budget and that service. And that, as you'll see later as well, is a 3.6% impact. Last number to highlight here, climate change. We did allocate $150,000 as a one-time item last year. We did create a reserve in 2022 so as to set aside those funds for future needs and use. I'm sure that'll be an ongoing discussion through strategic planning and other areas, but we have removed that as a one-time item and it can be revisited in the future. Debt costs are increasing. We have, as shown in our capital budget reports, a number of debt financed areas, all of which still keep us lower in the comparative benchmarking of debt values. So that's good news, but we are capturing those with the operating budget. The library report, of course, which Craig presented, some overall decreases to grants and partnerships, and then the all other items, which includes a number of fluctuations, but are just summarized in that remaining $12,000 decrease. And again, that section 7 of the online package does have greater detail to show both the prior budget and actual and all the forecasted information for these. Again, graphically showing the percentage of wages and benefits being the largest at 46%, materials and supplies at 23%, and then 22% for reserve transfers, including all the capital and all other amounts there. So MPAC, there's not much to report. We've actually coordinated for MPAC to make a presentation to council at the February 27th council meeting, and they'll be able to give you a greater insight into where we are at with assessment. As of right now, the information we have is that reassessed property values won't be sent out until it will be in effect for the 2024 budget. So we still have one more budget, this budget, to not have any phase-in or any other type of reassessment change that'll be impacting the town. Certainly, and I think I do note this as well in the risk section, a reassessment, particularly after at least 7 years, will be a challenge for the town. There will be a number of shifts, not only between property types, between residential and non-residential, but also within the residential class. There can be shifts at the best of times, but a 7-year in a very, very fast-changing market will undoubtedly have a lot of challenges for us in managing those changed values. Again, I would just refer to that report CBC 05 for more information on assessment for this year. And the total growth of the town is 1.61%. Just showing that here over the last number of years, we've been fortunate in the last 5 years, as you would expect with development and development revenues we've shown. This year is lower than we were hoping at 1.61. The 5-year average has been 1.94%. And again, you can see the dollar values by property class in that other report. So if we add up those two impacts just for the base before we talk about other enhancements to our operations, then it's a total base budget increase of $243,700 or 0.79. When we realize the benefit of assessment growth, where more properties are helping to shoulder the burden of the tax levy, it's a negative 0.82%. And this just shows that for the tax bill, it takes the regional and the education components to show what that total increase. And I would just caution again that region line, it does include the transit, which is going to the Niagara Transit Commission. So yes, that's a large number. However, it is also based on the most recently available report of the region, which was proposing a 9.4% increase. So certainly there is additional pressure on that line. So the supplementary budget, in overview here, and the way we structure this is it's different decision units for consideration. It allows us to move through some of the changes, particularly in the staffing. We want to be transparent and have you be able to review and analyze those impacts on a per item basis. So we present both items that council has seen before, which is the 4 requests under Part A and 14 requests under Part B, both of which have either base or one-time impacts. But due to the size and nature of them, we are presenting those separately. So Part 1 is a total of $99,000. And again, these costs do continue to be borne by the budget in future years. The first is $79,000, and this is under Part 1 because IS did bring forward a staffing study earlier in 2022, and this was one of the recommendations of that. As well, there's a co-op student recommendation for staffing of $20,000. Then we have $195,000 of one-time costs, and again, these now, they're not adding to the total levy amount as they are reserve funded. The first one is for $45,500 for electronic data and records management system. And anytime you see that GLRS, it's spelled out here as the General Levy Rate Stabilization Fund. That allows us to capture surpluses and other amounts from prior years and then redistribute them in future budgets. And then the second one there is the $150,000 for the Black Creek Douglastown Improved Access. It's a Class EA, also funded by the GLRS. So this is the larger consideration for the supplementary, where it's the base costs that continue indefinitely, and this is a total of $526,000 proposed for the 23 budget, $20,000 for a community swim lessons grant, and each of these, I just would mention, in your memo on the e-agenda has a worksheet that describes not only the nature of it, but also some of the business case related to that and some of the more detailed level of costs that would be associated with each one of these. The second there is $150,000 for Ontario Land Tribunal appeals and the legal costs associated with that based on our expectation and recent information. Then there's 5 staffing items for parking and bylaw enforcement officer in PDS, environmental planner, net of some expectation to recapture some fees with that new position. Parks beautification enhancements, this is to help deal with some of, or enhance our garbage collection in some areas in parks. Fire training officer and communications coordinator, making that position permanent. So then these are all, again, reserve funded, but you can see them here. We'll go through these in detail later, but primarily consultants and studies. Some really important works related to the secondary plans, for example, which council just had a report on Monday. Industrial land development and servicing strategy, important works for the future development of the town, the official plan, and so on. As well as a business system analyst at the bottom there, funded for 23, related to the strong modernization needs that the town is coordinating. So updated for all of those items, they total with budget impacts of $624,890 or 2.04%. So they all combine with the negative expressed before of negative 0.9% to be an increase to the town's budget of 1.22%. And I would just show this, the lightly shaded bar here for the base. You can see the negative 0.9% in the light blue under 2023. And then more importantly, the total bar graphs on the far right expressed as a percentage for both the town in blue and the total tax bill in orange. So with incorporating all of the other different levies from the region and education, it's a total at this point estimated increase of 7%. And I've added, similar to what I do with the water and wastewater, the CPI rate, just to show some of the relationship there. Certainly, we're mindful of not only the pressure that comes to bear on the town, but also our citizens, and trying to balance, again, here you can see balancing the affordability with what we're presenting. So this was what's in your report, that's 7.3%. We recently did receive more refined some draft rates from the regional report, so that would just drop slightly to 7%. So this is the more up-to-date version at this point, still based on the 9.48% increase. So that is a total tax bill increase of 7%. And you can see there the town's component on the top row of 1.12%. And this just breaks it down. Dollar amount for it to show the base and supplementary items. Again, with the negative, you'll see the base decreasing the town levy of $1,392, but then with the supplementary, bringing it back to a total dollar increase per year of $15. Important to highlight some of the risks. These do change some from year to year. Some of these are new this year, certainly inflation again. For 2023, we did reference that rate. We're mindful of rates lowering. They did maintain to 6 or above throughout the remainder of 2022, but forecasts are hopeful that rate will continue to come down during 2023. Similar with interest rates, we expect a leveling off there as well. Federal and provincial, that's been a theme for the town as well for many months, with policy changes and dealing with the impacts of those. Development charges certainly has a financial impact for the town, as well as staffing issues related to Bill 23 and other bills. Funding is something where we're tracking in relation to the federal and provincial impacts. Asset management, we've done our best again to show an inflationary increase, albeit somewhat less than what we would like to see in keeping up with in total inflation. And then we always know tracking with other studies that reveal what our more refined and truer costs of long-term sustainability are for all of our assets. Economic factors, Many stories you'd be familiar with there, again, with interest rates affecting both our investments, but also on the debt side, as we now reach a point where projects on the capital side are completed and we're looking to issue debt. Those rates have changed and increased with similarly to investments. Utilities and fuel, of course, natural gas is one that in particular has increased substantially. Assessment, we did talk about this, but certainly there's risk there. Again, I did talk about most of these, but not only with the tax classes, appeals, we have a strategy with this budget and the last two budgets to put some of the supplementary tax revenue we have to a reserve, expecting that the 7-year impact is going to be a much larger impact than we normally would expect. As well, we'll see some of the impacts of tax increment grants as that assessment comes online. The regional taxes, not only the tax rates themselves, but the policy is set by the region, and those ratios are done in April typically. And then environmental, only need to go back and look a couple months ago to know that certainly has an impact not only on our infrastructure, but our operations. So there's any number of emerging issues or threats that can be attributed to environmental conditions with related restoration and strengthening costs that are required. Opportunities, the findings of the modernization reviews we've done in the last couple of years have pointed to some systems that are old, some systems that are missing or not there at all really, or have, interim measures or ways of capturing and dealing with data, and unintegrated systems which slow us down and prevent or create duplication. So we're pretty excited about some of the enhancements that we're beginning to plan that provide for greater efficiencies and greater access for data, not just for staff, but for council, for the community as well in many ways. Funding advocacy, we have a strong group that meets regularly to make sure we're leveraging as much as we can of other levels of government. Fees and charges, that report did come back on December 7th in advance of year end so that we could increase any fees effective January 1. We still have a fee study outstanding as well for our building permits and in that division. So we're always looking to make sure we find an opportunity to balance, again, the burden of fees with the tax levy. There's some areas in terms of opportunities that I think are ripe for review, for a closer look. In particular, sports fields have been something we've identified as having a very, very low recovery of costs related to those. And then again, the assessment base, the opportunity is that even with the spending of the industrial land and servicing study, as we attract and grow our non-residential assessment, that only strengthens and gives us greater diversity with our assessment base. Forecasts. There's a number of drivers that are impacting our forecasts at this point for 2024, dropping off in 2025. There's a number of, as I noted earlier, there's debt coming online. There's some staffing phase-ins that will impact that. Some of our assumptions are conservative for revenues, so we would be hopeful that we can mitigate some of that, but there are a number of pressures for the future. Wages, as Craig noted, the current collective bargaining agreement does expire at the end of 2024, and labor issues are fast changing as well. Debt, as I noted there, those are the changes noted. As well, there's two projects that are noted in your recommendations tonight. One is for a new 6 Mile Creek flooding project that looks to add $500,000 for 2023 and forecasts a rough estimate of $3 million for construction in the second year following. And that is something that's a new asset, not in our forecast, so that would typically be debt funded. So a lot of these things combine to add costs and pressures on the operating side. The capital operating impacts have all been explained in the capital report, but there are some phase-ins that are much larger for next year. Much like we saw the systems increases this year, there are some operational increases we're trying to forecast for for the ERP, which is the financial system, as well as Splashpad, which has significant operational costs as well. We've affordable housing, we do have an upcoming report that will look at spending in relation to that. The 2022 budget approved $250,000 of base contributions to affordable housing programs. So that report will look at some of how that might be spent and whether there's additional need. The 22 supplementary item for that forecasted that to go up to $400,000. We haven't brought that additional $150,000 increase forward with this budget. We're just waiting for that report to give guidance to that. So also looking ahead, the budget timelines, this summarizes all the different areas that we've encountered and still have yet to look at. We have set aside next week, Wednesday, February 22nd, should we wish to have additional review. But otherwise, this levy budget would be brought forward to council approval by bylaw on February 27th, along with the capital, the final capital components. The region, again, are scheduling their policy ratio bylaws and review for end of April. We would then, as a town, typically bring forward our tax rate bylaw in May so that we can mail out no later than the first week of June the final tax bills to our residents. So made mention of 4 key messages concluding tonight. Base budget is a net decrease of 0.8% and benefits from growth of 1.6. Supplementary budget items of 2.2 are being brought forward based on staff's recommendations to address operational, staffing, and strategic enhancements. Transit is a transfer of 3.6% to the new Niagara Transit Commission, which is a reduction from last year's budget. And then again, the total tax bill, it's an increase to the median household for Fort Erie of 1.12, or for the total tax bill of 7%. And here clearly, as you see at the bottom of Appendix 2 in red, if you add the 1.12 to the 3.63 that is being removed from our budget, as it's no longer responsibility, the total of those two would be 4.75. So these are all the different recommendation areas in the report that we will go through following budget questions. And then just a summary of the amounts here found at the bottom of Appendix 2. It's a $31.4 million proposed budget, which increases by the budget increases of 1.22%. Expressed for the median household is 1.12%, 7% for the total amounts on the 23 tax bill, including the regional changes. And then that is a $17.84 total tax bill increase per month for the median household. That is it. Return the mic to you, Chair.
That was like you practiced that for a week. You had that down pretty pat.
Thanks.
You never cease to amaze me with numbers. You're a magician. Okay, so do we have any comments or questions at this point on the presentation? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott, through you to Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you for the presentation. One thing I didn't see was legal fees, because I know that we're changing we've lost our shared lawyer, and we're looking for another lawyer. I didn't see that in there. Where would I be finding that?
Yeah, the one item through you, Chair, to Councillor Noyes, in Appendix 1, we did highlight separately the staff composition changes. So in there, it referred to the CAO report 14/2022. That report did itemize those changes, including that change.
So that's included in here.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, okay, are we also talking about the supplemental budget right now? Okay.
Well, through you, Chair, we will go through each item as part of the parts listed in the recommendations later. And I would maybe say if it is specific to the merits or a discussion on any one of those, that maybe we wait until we go through each of those separately later.
Okay, and I guess then if we want to add something to the supplemental budget, we should wait till we get there.
No, we can discuss that now.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just wondering about generators. I know we had the request from the Lions for a generator at the Crystal Ridge for $150,000. I would suggest that we don't necessarily go 100. I do think there is a recognized need for a warming center in that end of town. I'm not saying that we put it all at once. Hopefully, we won't have another storm like that for a while. But, start putting money towards obtaining a generator for that building.
Chair, I would maybe either refer to CAO or the Director of Infrastructure Services. Obviously, we did have a report recently on that, but if you want to comment.
Mr. McQueen?
Thank you, through the chair. With respect to the generators, one of the issues that we had talked about, I think previously at one of the council meetings around the emergency management, was looking at facilities and the feasibility of the generators in those facilities, because if the intent is to have the HVAC systems on, as Mr. Schufelt talked about as well, with the libraries, it's a much larger scoped type of generator. I don't know that we have enough information on where we might put them. And we've also had some discussion with our facilities group as well about the option of installing transfer switches so that facilities may not have a dedicated generator, but they would have all of the plug-in ready to go for a rental unit that might be a larger scale, less costly than fixed generators at a number of different sites. And so the portability of the generator might save us on ongoing costs for maintenance and upkeep to the generators, which often don't run until you really need them. So it's an area that we're looking at. I think if we identified in the year that there was merit to move forward with some of the generators for future emergency, I think we would probably bring its own report back just to talk about what the costs, and probably look to maybe reserve fund it from the emergency management reserve, which at this point are trying to figure out what makes the most sense and what's most cost effective for what we might be anticipating. And I think we're not quite there yet, but we would bring something back once we take a better look at that.
Thank you for that. I'm just wanting to make sure that we're kind of keeping the storm is not that far behind us. And I also know that during the election, we also had a problem with the generator, with the power going out and the need for a generator. So I think that's what I just wanted to make a comment, is that I am glad that we mentioned a number of times, even though we're taking, our budget is 4.2, forgot the exact amount, that we are taking out that transit, the $1.1 million. So that's kind of moving someplace else, but the taxpayer is still going to be on the hook for that.
That's right.
Any further questions or comments? Your worship?
Yeah, this is for questions. Comments come during the report.
Oh, you ready to, okay, so you're ready to go now on the?
No, I've got some questions. I'm just saying this isn't comments or questions, this is just
Oh,
questions. So I wonder if we could move to slide 22, which is the slide relative to base and assessment, medium household. And just for clarity, my understanding is that the region may be collecting the monies for the new transit commission, but it's not really the region's money. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. Right. The region has established the Niagara Transit Commission. The requisitions will be collected by the town and remitted to the region for them to allocate share with the Transit Commission. So you're right, and that's why I did highlight that it is the general, the waste, which also has its own separate levy rate that taxpayers will see on their tax bills, as will the transit. So when you receive your tax bill, you'll see for region, you'll see three different amounts. The general, which includes police and all other regional costs, waste, and then a third line now this year, new for transit.
The reason I raise it is because it's not completely fair to say that the whole 15.28% is because of the region raising its tax rates, because there's a large component, I think it's $58 or $60 million relative to transit. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. The other question, And so you've been very careful, Mr. Chair, I know that Mr. Jansen's been very careful to deal with this issue about the reduction of our general levy because of transit. And he shows that on slide 16. It's about $1.1 million, or as the Appendix 2 in the report states, 3.63% of our budget. And there's a reason for that. Why are you wanting to make sure that this is patently clear and transparent?
Mr. Jansen?
The 1.12% is the increase of our budget, but it benefits from an uploading of those services, which are still going to be borne by the taxpayer. So while it's no longer the lower tier municipalities' responsibility to collect it in their own budget, taxpayers will still be paying for that. And that varies across Niagara for different municipalities, but every municipality that previously was paying transit services is benefiting from that upload to the new commission.
Thank you. And so in our case, it's 3.63%.
Yes.
We are the fourth largest transit provider in Niagara prior to the amalgamation. So I suppose the larger system you have, the greater portion of your tax levy would have been devoted prior to this year to public transit.
Yeah, that's what I understand from at least a couple other presentations, that their share would be considerably larger than ours.
And I believe that you've made a point of making sure that it's clear that although from last year to this year, the increase would be 1.12%, you have to factor in the fact that there was envelope created for public transit of 3.63%, so the overall increase would be 4.75.
That's right.
And you're doing that because I presume you want to make sure that we're completely transparent here in Fort Erie when we're providing the budget to our residents.
Yeah, we did have a discussion with the region and try to find different ways to show that. In any given year, the region itself may benefit from uploading or downloading with the province, which has been more the typical experience for the region. But, in our case, this hasn't happened in many years. I think the regional waste line would have been the last time this order of magnitude of change with the way the taxes are allocated would have been that. And that's much before my time, I think. And so, yeah, we're trying to show and communicate that in a few different ways, that really, even on this slide 37, it's the combination of both our portion of the 1.12, but also the benefit of the 3.63 in the bullet above it.
Just one final question. And you're doing that, Mr. Jansen, because you believe that's a fair way for the residents to have a clear understanding of what the municipality is doing in terms of the services they're providing and the charges that they're making for their taxes.
I think our residents are better served having an expectation from the overall cost of our change, again, combined with others, but to know really what our control, the decision of the amalgamation of the transit was a decision of the regional triple majority group, but we believe it's better for us to be transparent more now rather than when taxpayers get their bill and are surprised by larger increases that don't perhaps reflect as well that true impact.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything further on the presentation before we move on? Okay, so we're going to go through these. If we have difficulty with one, we'll deal with it like that.
Put it on the floor. I'll move it so we can put it on the floor.
Thank you. Are you going to put them up, or Jonathan?
I could bring them up if you want to follow along, on the slides. Okay, if you want to put the slide back on, then I will. Actually, what I'll have you do, do you want to go to the website? Sure. Or the agenda site?
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a quick point of clarification? Sure. So we're going to vote on each individual item separately and then...
No. What we'll do is, if we have we'll go through them. If we have one that we want removed or amended, we'll do that then.
So similar to what we do for capital?
Yeah.
Fair point. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So Chair,
Yes, sure.
what if we have some general questions before we get into the specific items?
That's all good.
Okay, so we can start that first?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. First page down. Is there a... There we go.
Pardon?
I'm okay.
Oh. Yeah, did you want to deal with that?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so it'll be at the end.
So that you're going to move that?
So we've already got the one on the floor, so we could move the other one to the end of the agenda, if that's agreeable.
That's agreeable to everybody? Okay.
We're getting into them all anyway, so.
Okay, we ready to rock and roll?
Good to go.
Okay. So, part one. The council approves the following supplementary based budget funding for 2023, subject to previous reports, resolutions. 1.1, $79,305 for supervisor roads and stormwater staffing costs. Your worship.
So Chair, I just had some questions with respect to the overall budget, if I could. And this really relates to page 4 of the memo, where there's an outline of expenditures, starting with wages and benefits and grants. And I was just wondering, at page 4, right. So underneath wages and benefits, there's about a $2 million difference between the 2022 actual and the 2023 proposed budget. Wages and benefits. Top line under expenses.
Oh, you talking materials and services?
No, wages and benefits,
Top line.
that line. So my question really relates to, I know that there's some new positions that we've already approved during various reports. Presumably they're in there. I know that there's some positions here that are referred to. The difference between the budget and the actual last year was about $500,000. And I'm presuming there's an explanation for that?
Through you, Chair. Most of that would relate to turnover and vacancies. There was, I think, likely a record high. Our Employment Services Department would tell you of vacancies during the year that would have been the primary result of that.
And then the other question does relate to grants in that same little box there. There's an increase in grants of about, well, it's over $1 million from budget to budget, and more than $1 million from actual to budget. Is there an explanation for that?
Yes, in this case, we've budgeted the first contribution, or the first $1 million of the $3 million payment to the South Niagara Hospital. Based on an existing report we've seen that they've made recently, they expect to be in a position where they would want their first advance to help support their first stages of costs already within 2023, with the remainder to be paid, I believe, in 2 or 3 years thereafter. So we forecasted the remaining payment in, I think it's 2025 at this point. So that $1 million jump, so the grants have increased by that $1 million. However, so have the transfers. It's fully transferred from reserves based on the contributions we've been making annually.
I was with you there until near the end.
So an extra $1 million in grant, because the payment to the hospital is a grant, $1 million, all of which we've set aside a total of $3 million in our reserves for the purpose of granting monies to the South Niagara Hospital. So you'll see an increase in the expenses. However, you'll see an offsetting transfer from reserves to pay for that grant. So it's a bit of an in and out where we're paying an extra $1 million in grants, but it's all fully funded from our reserves that we've been accruing since 2013.
Right, okay, which is referred to further down in the material.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go back to 1.1, $79,305 for the supervisor of roads, stormwater staffing costs. Comments or questions? So we'll go to 1.2, which is $20,000 for asset management, co-op, student, and staffing costs. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, so we'll go to part 2. The council approves the following supplementary one-time funding for 2023, subject to previous reports and resolutions. So 2.1 is $45,500 for electronic data and records management system, funded by the general levy rate stabilization reserve. Any comments or questions with regards to that? Okay, we'll move on to 2.2, which is $150,000 for Black Creek Douglastown Improved Access Class Environmental Assessment, funded by the GLRS reserve. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just more of a general comment about some of these reserve and single items that we have in the budget. And, I understand, the pressures and the challenges that many of us are facing right now. We're all seeing inflation and interest rates go up. And as I sat down and I went through the budget and I looked at these, items, line by line individually, you always try to be a steward of the taxpayers' money and look for ways to save money and be smart about it. And, the first thing you think is, why would you not spend this or why would you not contribute to that reserve? And my attitude sitting here is always, it's not a matter of, not paying for these. It's just a question of when. And, I'm not under any illusions that, the budget balances itself or anything like that. I understand this takes work, this takes effort. We have good staff, we have a good council here who has a grasp on it, at least in my opinion. And I really can't justify taking this any lower. Even when I look at items like these for, environmental assessments or reserve entries, we run a real lean ship here. And when you look at what some other municipalities are doing. If I lived in those municipalities, I may have questions. And I always make decisions based on, I'm a resident just like everyone else. I pay the same taxes. I see the bill and I cringe. I see the regional portion and I cringe. I see municipal portions and understand that they all combine together. So these are just general comments about the fact that we do our best to ensure that the money that we spend and that we budget every year are necessary for this municipality to continue operating and succeeding the way it does and providing a quality of life to the residents that we do. And I don't sit here and think that we should be extravagant. I don't sit here and think that we have to, spend all this money on, pie in the sky ideas. But when I look at stuff like this, I can defend these decisions. And I know that even if we, tried to defer it to, take a few points off the increase, it just means it's going to be a bigger increase down the road. So these were just more, more of a thought process, just for any residents out there who are watching. There's not a lot of discussion, here, because we do a lot of that behind the scenes, and we kind of go through these things, ask questions, find out what we can do. I understand the challenges that residents are going to face. We got a big tax increase coming from the region. Municipalities are facing a similar burden, that the hens are coming home to roost. And I just want residents to know that I am paying the same taxes that they do, and I wouldn't be supporting this budget and these items if I didn't think they were necessary for our success into the future. And I just wanted to say that now, because this is a good example of one of those items, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to make these comments. Thank you.
No problem. Any other comments on that specific item, the 150,000? Okay. So we'll move over to part 3. The council approves the following supplementary base budget new funding request for 2023. So we'll start with 3.1, which is $20,000 for community swim lessons and grants. Councillor Noyes.
Just a question, is this amount also going to cover the cost for the, if we once again rent the facility from the Fort Erie Academy? Because we had lessons there last year, right?
I believe that the position of the town has changed on this issue, and I think it's basically because of the fact that operating the FIA pool during the summer was basically running the Kinsman pool and paying a little money to lease it out. So I think what they've done here is they've decided that the Boys and Girls Club will offer swimming lessons to those who wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford them. Probably takes us off the hook for approximately $100,000 worth of expenses that would go into the chemicals, the lifeguarding, the insurance, and everything that goes with the pool. And to be quite honest, I just really picked up on that today. A little bit shocked on it, but nevertheless, it is a cost savings to the town of pretty close to $80,000.
Again, I appreciate the information. I'm just hoping that there's going to be, I understood last year that cumulatively for both sites, the Fort Erie and the Boys and Girls Club, they were full. Which was wonderful. I mean, they were well used, and that if the Boys and Girls Club is going to be able to provide enough lessons for the number of kids that may need it. I'm just wanting to make sure.
And I just want to, Mr. Jansen, did I pretty much cover that?
Jerry, yes, you did. You captured the change in cost. Last year, it was brought forward as a one-time pilot project, and this is the recommendation for this year. I'm not sure if any other staff have comments on the capacity issue that you raised, Councillor Noyes, but from what I understand, I think that there's expectation that there would be capacity to imitate the program that was run last year.
Okay. Any further questions on that item? Okay, then we'll move on to 3.2, which is $150,000 for OLT appeals, Your Worship.
So are we building up a war chest here because we think there's going to be a lot of appeals coming?
I was going to say, it doesn't seem like near enough.
Well, I guess my question would be, if any of these monies aren't expended in 2023, is it the plan to put that into a reserve so that we've got funding? Because this will become institutionalized if it goes into the base budget.
Through you, Chair. You're right, this does become an institutionalized base budget amount. It wouldn't come back to a reserve of any sort unless we brought forward a recommendation. We have done that in the past through our quarterly variance reporting, where perhaps in the third quarter, where if we're forecasting something less than the full need of that, we could then allocate that towards, we don't really have a relevant reserve for that, but if nothing else, through the rate stabilization reserve, we could allocate funds similar to, in a way, what we did with the climate change funds this year.
My second question is, do we have an amount already that we allocate to OLT appeals?
Mr. Jansen?
We do. There are general consulting and legal costs that are in part of our base budget. I don't have that figure in front of me, but there would be some element of an existing base legal cost in our budget.
Yeah, okay. I think it's particularly prudent that we have this in our budget, simply because it's pretty apparent that our vision of growth in this community doesn't necessarily always mesh with the vision of some of the developers that are coming into town here. So some of these appeals are going to be inevitable. Thank you.
Anybody else? Then we'll move on to 3.3. Excuse me, 71,780 for parking bylaw enforcement officer. Your worship.
Yeah, I wanted to give Councillor Dubanow something to think about. And I do agree with your comments about staff, the time that they've spent on this. This isn't something where they pop up in 2 or 3 weeks and we get this lengthy report about our budget, whether it's capital budget, whether it's this budget, whether it's water, wastewater. A lot of time and energy is put in, and all of our senior staff and all of the people that work with them putting together these budgets are to be commended. I had asked for some background information about this particular item. We, in fact, already have this bylaw enforcement officer working for the municipality, but the person's on I guess it'd be on a contract. It's a temporary employee. The position originally arose during the pandemic, and we received funding for that position because we anticipated that there would be an increase in calls and the need for bylaw enforcement, and that's exactly what happened. Since then, there have been some changes. The information that I've reviewed shows that there has been a significant increase in call volume, but there's also been a pretty significant reduction in the number of outstanding calls, so that these additional bylaw enforcement officers have done a tremendous job. They've had some additional responsibilities tacked on, as with the CAO and Mr. Jansen. And I'm thinking that this is still a position that may not be needed by the end of 2023. I'm thinking, however, though, there may be some additional duties that during the course of the year we might find we need this bylaw officer for. An example would be maybe more aggressive short-term rental enforcement in some cases. I had raised the other night a concern about, as did Councillor Christensen, about the number of trees that are being cut down here, and maybe we need to get a tree bylaw back in operation. That would be another one. So, Mr. McQueen, I wonder if you could just reiterate that this is a position that could continue on as a supplementary temporary position, which would allow it to be funded from a reserve fund as opposed to the levy, which would give you an opportunity between now and maybe after Labor Day to assess whether there's a need for ongoing, in which case we could consider this again in 2024. I'm sorry, Chair, through you.
Mr. McQueen.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, you're correct. The position is temporary. The request has come forward on the notion that we believe there may be some additional demands with the short-term rentals, but you've identified a number of other areas that we spoke about as well. What we could look at is we generally don't fund permanent positions from reserve, just from a prudent financial management perspective. If the direction is to move forward with a temporary position and reevaluate it in the year, we could fund it from the reserve for the portion of the year that it would require funding, but I'll have Mr. Jensen confirm that. That would have temporary funding attached to temporary reserve funding, which would be, I think, advisable as an option to reduce the net levy slightly. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Jansen if he's got further comments.
Mr. Jansen?
No, our CAO is quite right. You're no longer the new CAO, I was going to say, but no. The opportunity to levy fund that would make sense in that scenario where it's something we reevaluate and are not committing to. That line had a levy impact of 0.23% for the median household, and would drop then the total levy for the town increase for the median household to 0.88%, 0.88, and the total adjusted to 4.5.
So if I could, Chair, so which reserve fund would this come out of if this was the direction that we took?
I would recommend, similar to the others, where we would use the rate stabilization reserve. That is a reserve where annually we do have some funding come in that's not committed to the levy from our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. So we are able to use that for not only urgent and emerging things, but to carefully plan and use it for temporary items like this.
Chair, I'd like to move that we amend this budget item to provide that it continue as a temporary position, that it be funded from the General Levy Rate Stabilization Fund, and that it be reviewed by the CAO during the course of 2023 for consideration again in 2024.
Okay. Any comments or questions with regards to that? Councillor Dubanow and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Your Worship, for bringing this up for discussion. I'm personally just looking at the bylaw and how we've seen our backlog drop and the responsive to calls. I'm fully in support of keeping this on for a temporary position for the 2023. I think especially as we enter into the summer, and this is going to be our first, I guess, fully normal summer. The borders open, life has returned back to as normal as it's going to get. I think we may find during the summer that the resources of a bylaw officer may be necessary going forward. So I'm good with keeping this temporary and adjusting the budget. I think when we come up to our next year's budget, I'm convinced that this is going to be necessary, especially with short-term rental enforcement, environmental enforcement, other issues. We've seen the calls increase, but we've had the staffing and we've seen it go down. I wouldn't want to run into a backlog again, but as long as we can maintain that staffing and that customer service level, I think this is a good idea for 2023, and then we'll reevaluate it when it comes up, after Labor Day. So I'll be supporting this, Your Worship, despite my comments. I think we're still getting what we need, just in a different way of doing it. So I'm going to support this, Your Worship.
Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Dubanow said. Was basically the same thing. My one question is about the amount was, and I can't pull this down, was in net of fines, right? Like this person.
No,
Trying to see where that was.
that's a different position.
Okay, but bylaw officers do fines.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, correct. The base budget has continued mostly to trend with what we were bringing in under the previous scenario. In a sense, yeah, if this would have been removed, there would have been an expectation that some of the revenues would have perhaps dropped as well.
Thank you.
And I would just note too, in relation to just, I think it's fairly clear, but in this case, the forecast for next year, trying to bring the full picture for a multi-year budget as well, already is 7.24%. So just to use this as an example, when you reserve fund this now with the potential to bring it back next year, that's adding to the 7.2 an additional 0.23% again. So just goes to show that, when we one-time reserve fund things, it's very helpful in the current year in bringing it down. Of course, there may be other changes and realities for next year's budget that help us get, again, below that 7.2, but it does then layer it on into future budgets.
Okay. Any further comments on this item? Okay, all in favor? Carried. So we'll move on to 3.4, $80,000 for environmental planner, staffing cost, net of fees. Comments or questions? Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment, just so the public is aware, a lot of, I'm sure, individuals are very well aware of the provincial changes. The municipality here in Fort Erie is now like the planning authority. It's all been removed from the region. So you'll find that there are a lot of staffing positions related to planning, things like that. It's always, you look at staffing and, people wonder, why can't people do more work? But there's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so much work someone can do and still be effective and good at the job they do. So the challenges with provincial legislation that we're facing are requiring us to do more work, and that requires more staffing, and that's why you see a lot of these here. Certainly if the mayor has some suggestions on how we can, deal with, operating budget versus reserves, certainly I'm open to that. But I think by the time that it's gotten here now, that we know that these are positions that are necessary to continue providing the service we do. And just with the challenges and the percentages, these are just comments for the public, just so that they're aware that we put a lot of thought into this. And, we're doing what we have to do, and we all pay the same taxes they do. So, Mr. Chair, it was just another comment. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Noyes, and then your worship.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I'm just wondering how this fits in with what we decided on Monday in regards to the developers or whatever hiring their own expertise, and when EIS is required, or the different studies that we may require that now will be perhaps funded by the developer themselves. How does this affect that?
Mr. Hrilovich?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So the developers already fund their EIS. They then submit those to planning staff, and the planning doesn't have an expert on staff to review those. We send those to the region. That regional function in planning under Bill 23 may cease. We don't know how that's going to play out. So this person would be responsible for looking at those studies. So it's a separate role from the one that you're mentioning.
If I can, thank you for that. How many EISs do we normally get, like let's say for last year, that the region reviewed for us?
Mr. Hrilovich?
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact number, but I would say half of the development applications we receive are accompanied by an environmental impact study.
Okay, so we don't
That could be 15 or 20 of those. Then they would be looking at, our woodlot structure. They'd be able to also respond to some of the items that the mayor referred to a little bit earlier in terms of the tree cutting and being able to attend a woodlot, look at those issues as well. So that would be part of it, and we would also be charging part of these fees back to the developer through our application fee. So right now we collect a fee from the developer, which we pay to the region to review these studies. So instead of sending that money to the region, we'd be paying for our own staff to do that.
Okay, so if I can continue, so hearing that, when we're looking at the dollar amount, and I can't see it because the screen's kind of in the middle there. So we're looking at the 80,000, I guess.
80.
We are looking at getting back 30,000 from the developer. He's going to be paying that towards it, right?
That's correct.
Right? Okay, so we've basically been paying the region 30,000 a year?
Sorry, to you again, Mr. Chair. We collect that money from the developer and we send that to the region. We don't pay it directly.
No, and I'm really not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to understand this, that if we're paying the region, I'm using this graph here, this chart here, that we've been paying, have we been eating the costs before?
No, I'm not sure how best to explain this. So when the developer submits his environmental impact study, we send that to the region to be reviewed. the region charges a fee of well, not 30, altogether $30,000 for the year. We collect then those fees from the developer, and we're basically a pass-through agency. We collect the money, we send it onto the region. The town is not paying those fees.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just trying to find out the discrepancy between what we were paying the region, which we're now assuming that responsibility, right? The developer is still paying for the EIS. We have to have somebody look at it to make sure it's valid or whatever, we have any concerns. And right now, we're paying the region $30,000 to do that, like in the past. But now we're looking at, it's going to cost the town $80,000. I'm just looking at the difference between the two numbers.
Okay.
So I don't get that part of it.
So maybe the CAO could help with that.
Mr. McLean?
Through the chair to Councillor Noyes. So I think with the download of the responsibilities to the municipality, although 2023 is legitimately a transition year for the region on the planning side, notionally, I think we could expect the region to begin a reduction of their portion of the planning. So kind of the reverse of the transit situation that we talked about earlier. But notionally, at some point, we would expect the region's planning amount on the regional portion of the bill to go down. We would assume, or we are assuming under Bill 23, a number of new requirements and responsibilities. So some of the role for the environmental planner would be directed at some of the other things that we address in normal planning applications. Mr. Hurlovich may be able to speak to it a bit more, but things like sub-watershed mapping and other things, we may have in-house expertise to be able to advance some of that work. Those would be responsibilities that previously we would have had the region comment on with their complement of planning staff. So this is a bit of a transition, but I think we would expect some reduction on the regional side of the planning to close the gap that you're referring to here.
If I can continue then. So I'm getting a clear idea that basically it's not just for the EIS, it's basically also for the, a big portion of this person's job is going to be for the environmental planning and the trees and everything else. Right. Okay, so it's not just, okay, thank you.
Your worship, did you have?
Yeah, just to tack on, that's correct. This would be more than just reviewing EISs. We've got climate change issues that we've raised up. We've talked about becoming a bird-friendly municipality. We can't do that unless we do certain studies. That may or may not involve the work that this individual does. We've got climate change issues. We've got resiliency issues in terms of our infrastructure. So this is a position that we will need to either have on board as an employee, or we're going to have to hire that once the region loses that capacity. So, yeah, I support that.
Councillor Flagg?
Thank you, Your Chair. Can you explain, Jonathan, why the second-year forecast goes $33,000 more on the wages and benefits?
Sure. With all of the staffing components, we're trying to be realistic with the amount that will be expected or required in the 23 budget. So in this case, with recruitment process and so on, it's been factored at some number of months less than 12/12ths. So this is probably a 9/12ths type scenario or something like that, where in future years it converts to the full year impact. That's what partly I highlighted in my presentation as well, with some of the wage increases this year related to 2022 supplementary items that now have a full 12-month impact.
Anything else on this item? Okay, then we'll move along to $54,450 for Parks Beautification Crew IS staffing cost. Comments, questions? We don't want to turn this one down. We have to get things cleaned up. Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to 3.6, $76,000 for fire training officer staffing costs. Comments or questions? And 3.7, which is the $73,355 for communications coordinator, CAO staffing costs. Okay, then we're going to move on to part 4. Council approving the following supplementary one-time new funding requests. 4.1, $75,000 for heritage consultant funded by GLRS Reserve. Comments or questions? Councillor Dubanow and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just so everyone knows, this is another Bill 23 related staffing requirement with the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. It's absolutely necessary for, in order for us to maintain our, protecting our built heritage in Fort Erie. We have to do this. Otherwise, we would be in a real tough position with dealing with our the register versus what is actually designated. And the Heritage Committee has a real, busy 2 years coming up, and they need the staffing assistant to be able to continue to run that program. So this, again, another Bill 23 challenge and another challenge in a very challenging time. And again, this is just for the benefit of the residents who may wonder. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Noyes.
And there's a report coming to us on next Wednesday, and it talks about the heritage changes and things like that. And in part of that, it says that if I have a heritage house, or I think I have a heritage house, I have to hire a heritage consultant. So that person is then doing the work. I'm just wondering whether, and this is a one-time funding thing too, I think. I'm trying to remember. How is that going to work if the person who has the heritage house, or new, wants to be registered, has to hire themselves a consultant, a heritage consultant? Why do we also need another heritage consultant to tell us that that one's doing the right job?
Your Worship.
Yeah, so we have a list of, I don't know whether it's 24, between 24 and 30, I believe, houses that our Heritage Committee is looking at in terms of making recommendations to designate them as heritage properties. Up until now, there's been no urgency for them to do that. There's been no specific timelines, and you'll recall that we've had properties before us that were put on a list a couple of decades ago. Under Bill 23, municipalities now have 2 years to determine whether they're going to be designated or not. We have a volunteer committee that that has professional staff assisting them, but not anyone who's got the expertise to be able to say, okay, if we're going to be getting these houses onto the designated list, so that you can then make the decision to designate them or not, we've got to have somebody who knows how to put all this together and can do it rather quickly. And if we don't, when the 2 years are up, those properties fall off the list of potentially designated properties and would have no protection whatsoever, because Bill 23, of course, there's the big haste to build 1.5 million houses all over the place. So this person would be specifically dedicated to assisting the Heritage Committee to provide the foundation to justify whether a property should be considered by this council as a heritage property or not. If it doesn't get done in 2 years, there's a major problem. So that's why this is a one-time item.
Go ahead. So the floor.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. And I do get that, and I do understand Bill 23 in regards to the moratorium, basically. Now, you do it now, you have 2 years, and if you don't, you don't. But what about those 24 houses or those 24 residents? I've always been, and this is my point of view, is that in the past, with the exception, I think, of 2 cases, that we don't force a property owner to be designated if they don't want to be. So I don't know if we're going to be changing that, because if I was one of those 24 owners, there's pros and cons for it. But if I wasn't one of those 24 property owners, and I don't want my house as designated, I would support that person. He bought the house and whatever, now to tack it on with a designation and all the implications that it comes with. I wouldn't be in support of that, and I know we have done it this year, I think, or this last few years twice. In the past, it was always the owner asking us to designate it. And I'm not saying they weren't tapped on the shoulder and said, you have a beautiful house here, you know, maybe you should have it designated, and here are the pros. Why? Because we can subsidize this and we can do A, B, and C. I would still go that way, and according to our report that's coming next Wednesday, if that's the case, that person has to hire the consultant, the heritage consultant, not us. So again, I know that there's 24 potential sites. Are we then saying that regardless of what the homeowner says, if this heritage consultant says it's heritage, we're going to basically say, you know, force that designation on that property? Because if we're not, then the fact that they're coming and they want it designated, they're supposed to provide their own. So that's my 2 cents.
Councillor Lewis next.
Yeah, I just had one quick question further to Councillor Noyes' inquiry about the report that's coming before us, but also with the upcoming strategic planning exercise that Council is going to be going through. I'm wondering if this might be a good opportunity to maybe defer this for both that report as well as some maybe a better opportunity to have a more frank and candid conversation in terms of how this role may work or where it might best fit. And those are just general comments.
Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely understand where Councillor Noyes is coming from. I'm not keen on seeing properties designated without the sort of the buy-in from the owner and the understanding of what it entails. But I also recognize that sometimes that just isn't possible, and that there's properties in town that we need to preserve for the sake of all of us, that it just doesn't align with the owner. We've run into that in a few times, and I think we've handled those situations relatively well. The heritage consultant, this is a broader issue, and with regard to getting, designating without consent, if you will, I think they may be putting the cart before the horse. We're facing a situation right now where we have about 30 houses that are on a municipal heritage register. Many of these houses have been on for decades. We're talking 30, 40, 50, 60 years. There's nothing registered on title. These properties transition between owners, completely unaware. There are properties in town that are on that register that the owners don't even know is on the register. So the intent, and we've had a lot of discussion about this position in the Planning and Development Services Subcommittee, the intent of this position is to be able to go through and essentially triage the properties that we have on the register in town, to look at which ones are most important to preserve our built heritage, because the clock is ticking right now. We have 2 years. And it's not only that they fall off the register at the end of 2 years, they cannot be designated again for at least 5 years. So you've got a 7-year period where someone could come in and I understand it. They own these properties. They want to do something with them, but it's up to us to legally protect them. And if we don't put that in place, those things could happen. So we're trying to get a grasp on what we need to preserve, what we need to get designated under the Heritage Act, and that clock is ticking now. I don't think deferring this would be the right idea, because we're in a very competitive job market right now. Every single regional municipality and the local area municipalities within those regional municipalities in Ontario have just seen dramatic shifting in planning responsibility. There are going to be a lot of positions that need filling. There's going to be a lot of people moving around, and we need to get on this now. And my worry is that if we don't get a heritage consultant in here to be able to look at these properties that are on the register and determine which ones we need to designate, we're not going to be able to get a consultant. And the volunteers on the Heritage Committee, they are wonderful individuals. And I have family on them. I know individuals there. They have a wealth of knowledge in this community. But to ask volunteers to take on the workload of a full-time employee is not fair. And I don't think it provides Fort Erie residents with the service that they need to be able to preserve our built heritage. So I think we need to deal with this now. I'm not going to support deferring it. And it's just going to allow us to be able to look at these properties. Another point, if you can indulge me, Mr. Chair, we will have a report coming forward about a heritage grant program to assist owners who have heritage properties in hiring heritage consultants, in preserving, repairing, and maintaining heritage features on the property. The details have to be finalized. The report hasn't been presented to council, but that's also going to help residents who have heritage properties not only maintain the ones they already have, but also give them the assurance that if they do designate, they're not on their own. The municipality will support them in what they need to do to maintain these heritage properties. And when you fit all of this together and what we're trying to do, the heritage consultant is a necessary component to that. And I think we need to act on this. There's way too much movement of planning officials within the province right now. Even some municipalities here in Niagara are hiring 20 plus, or so they say. And I think we need to get on this. I wouldn't support a deferral. I think there's a lot of good reasons, and I hope I articulated them, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Councillor Dubanow, I do agree completely with the volunteers on the committee, and I think you put that quite eloquently. One question that I have, or an observation, I was quite surprised to see this falling under community planning, and I'm just wondering, where does museum services fit into this overlay?
I don't believe they do in this case.
Yeah, it's community planning.
Do they?
Okay.
Okay.
And that goes back to my point in terms of our strategic planning and some better opportunities to have some conversations. But to Councillor Dubanow's point, I don't see a deferral on this being a rather lengthy time. We have a report coming in a couple of weeks, and we have a strategic planning session that's following parallel. So I think we're talking a few weeks, not months. But I would prefer to have those conversations either in a strategic planning session or in camera.
Okay. Mr. McQueen? I see you over there, Councillor Noyes. I'm not ignoring you.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Lewis. The planning consultant that's identified here would be reserve funded, and so we would not be. It wouldn't have an impact on the levy necessarily, but if this item was approved this evening, we could defer the decision for the engagement until after the strategic planning, just to sort of cross-check with council, because I think that's maybe what you were looking at, is just a fail-safe to say, if we choose not to go ahead with it, then you could give us that direction. If we don't hire the consultant, we don't draw from the reserve. And so it doesn't have any levy impact, but if the intent is to approve it and just wait on the decision to do the engagement, then we certainly could do that.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I would welcome that approach. I think there needs to be some more discussion on this.
Councillor Noyes.
Yes, and I appreciate that. That basically would also satisfy my concern if we have next Wednesday's meeting and discuss what's going on there too. And I would like to know for that meeting, I think there's only 2 incidents that I can recall where the owner didn't want it. We said, too bad, you're going to do it. We're going to continue with the designation. And I'm pretty sure one we were challenged in court. I'm not sure if not both of them we were challenged in court, but I can't recall the first one. So I'm just thinking we have, that's going to be open for discussion next Wednesday too. We have to decide whether we're going to be forcing the designation on property owners that are not in favor of it.
Your Worship?
Well, Chair, that's not really what the report on next Wednesday's agenda is. It's about whether there should be a heritage property grant that would encourage people to offer their properties for designation, or if they already are designated, would provide them with an opportunity to receive some funding from the municipality to do whatever repairs or maintenance they need to do on their home. So they're two separate issues, and the report that would be required for that is to provide particulars of the nature of the repairs or maintenance that is going to take place. And if you're designated as a heritage property, you can't make changes to your property, your building, without getting a report that indicates this is compliant with the reasons why the property was designated. So they're two completely different things. We're still in jeopardy of having properties, as long as we don't have these properties put on a list for potential designation within 2 years, we run the risk that those properties, as Councillor Dubanow has said, will be off. There'll be no opportunity for another 5 years to consider them. We've had 3 properties where we have two properties specifically, one on Ridge Road, one at 1 Burns Place, and then we've had the issue with the ongoing problem on Ridge Road with the owner who says he'll do certain things and won't. That's a fairly recent phenomenon where we've had to deal with property owners who simply want to disregard what we consider to be the heritage value of the properties. We didn't have to worry about that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We do now. And Bill 23 only heightens the jeopardy to those properties because now the government is more sympathetic to houses being constructed and developers being allowed to move the goalposts to accommodate them, not necessarily the community. That's why this is particularly important. As far as, we've had lots of discussions about whether our heritage is important or not. Some of us maybe even talked about protecting existing neighborhoods during the course of the election, which would involve protecting our heritage properties. So we can talk about that during the strategic plan, but this is, in my view, this is a necessary expense, has no impact on the levy. The CAO is responsible for the timing of when it would be hired, but I think this is an important aspect of our community. If we don't act upon it, and I don't know whether there'll be cases in the future where we will want to designate a property over the wishes of the owner. I do know that the report that we're going to be considering Wednesday will help to sweeten the pot to encourage those individuals to want to designate their property. That to me seems to be completely appropriate. So I don't know, but if we had in the future a property that we thought was particularly important to the heritage of this community, I wouldn't hesitate for 1 minute to make the designation, and because in my view, that's more important than the interests of one individual.
Okay, back to you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree very much so with the remarks for that the mayor has made with respect to this. I think my concern is where does it fall, who's involved, and how do we better do that? So.
Okay, so we're done with this issue and we're moving on? So we're moving to, by the way, debate is good for the soul. It's good entertainment for the public. Right? Because they know we're all awake here tonight. And it's probably one of the most active budget meetings that I've been in. I'm enjoying every minute of it, so. That's our purpose, Chair. Everything's good. So, we're moving on to 4.2, $100,000 for urban design consultant funded by the GLR as reserve again. Any comments about this? Councillor Noyes.
Well, thank you. So I'm in reviewing this, it talks about one of the reasons we need this is because we don't have an in-house person, right? So if we have an in-house person, if we are lucky enough to attract somebody, what happens to the person we have contracted for the 100,000?
Mr. Hilovich?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, it's to hire a consultant for 1 year to prepare design guidelines for the entire municipality. Once they have submitted those, their work is done. The town adopts those, and then the planners would implement those design guidelines on a development by development basis.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm just reading it. It just says this work was originally to be performed by an in-house PDS staff. So I know we don't have the staff, and I know we're down, and we will be very fortunate if we actually get the staff before this contract is up. But I'm just wondering if if someone falls from the sky and is wonderful and can do this job and is now on staff, have we contracted this person? I'm being a bit facetious here because I'm hoping we do attract somebody, that we don't need this contract position and we can do it in-house, but I think the chances of that are not great. So I'll let it go.
Anyone else?
Peter, I know.
Okay, then moving on
If
to
we find another Peter.
250,000 for secondary plans consultant funded by 225,000 from the DC reserve and 25,000 from the GLRS reserve. Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Again, I don't know if everybody got the same email that I got about the secondary plans and being funded, et cetera, from somebody who appeared to know what they were talking about. How many secondary plans are we anticipating that this get completed in 1 year?
Excuse me, through you to the councillor. This would be one secondary plan. So as we outlined in our report on Monday, so our traditional way of completing a secondary plan would be for staff to carry that out. So this would be to fund that secondary plan. So there are environmental studies, servicing studies, and so on that all need to be done. And the alternative to that is if the developer was to pay for the secondary plan, in which case then the planner would manage the consultant and not actually do the work. So there could be two ongoing at the same time. In fact, I think the report on Monday said there could be possibly 1, 2, or more secondary plans going on simultaneously.
And thank you for that explanation. Again, I'm just trying to reconcile the discussion on Monday night to tonight in regards to exactly what Mr. Hurlovich has said, is that we're hoping that somebody else is going to be funding a lot of these parts to the secondary plan. So, and I guess if we don't spend it, we don't spend it. So 250,000 is in there with the anticipation that we might need it, but if we don't need it, it's not going to be there. It's not going to be spent. Is that?
Well, it's coming out of reserve, so it would sit in reserve until a year that we would need it. So yes, if we don't spend it, we don't spend it. It remains in reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Else? Then we'll move on to 4.4, 50,000 for industrial land development and servicing study funded by the Industrial Land Development Reserve. Councillor Dubanow?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I think it goes without saying with our recent urban boundary expansion and the addition of employment lands, even though this doesn't necessarily relate to that specific item, the necessity for employment lands in this community has always been very important. It's one of the main reasons I ran in 2018. And watching everything unfold and our availability to perhaps facilitate some good employers in the future within the town of Fort Erie and increase our tax base is very, very important to me personally. And I hope it's important to every individual in this town because it leads to our prosperity and the ability for families to remain here, have good jobs, and have a sustainable, full community, a vibrant community. So this isn't that much. I mean, it's out of a reserve. It's I know $50,000 is a lot to a family. It's a yearly income for a lot of people, but in the scheme of a municipality and the millions and millions of dollars of the levy, this is a small amount for a very important item that can have a very positive long-term impact on our community. And I hope every councillor supports this. And with it being employment lands, it's something very important to me. I know I've talked a lot this evening, Mr. Chair. You commented how this has been more debate and discussion that we've had in a while. So I figured I'd just add to that, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Is anybody else? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, and I just want to add just a further comment. I'm very happy with the direction in which previous council went with the Economic Development Department, and certainly a direction that I had hoped we would have moved towards years ago. But if there is ever an opportunity to offset our residential tax base, it's going to be by industrial tax base, and I think this is very good money being spent at a time where we need to. So.
Anyone else? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Again, I just want to echo what Councillor Dubanow said and Councillor Lewis. And I think the report says it well. We have 130 more hectares of industrial land, and we need to service them, and we need to know how to service them and what the costs are going to be. So I think this is going to be a win-win situation, and we were very fortunate to have the official Niagara official plan recognize all the lands that we wanted to be recognized as industrial. So we're in a very enviable position, but now we have to make sure we can service them.
So we'll move on to 4.5, which is $150,000 for a new official plan funded by $67,500 from the DC Reserve and $82,500 from the GLRS Reserve. Comments or questions? Councillor Flagg?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that this is a second part of this funding. Has the first part begun?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. No, it has not started. We're working on the terms of reference now. And so we began putting funding away last year, knowing that the cost would be around $300,000 to undertake the update of the official plan. It's actually two elements. So it would be bringing the official plan into compliance with the new Niagara official plan, and then doing our 10-year update that we're required to do under the Planning Act. So it's quite a large study.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We'll move on to 4.6, which is $100,000 for Ontario Land Tribunal Appeals Consultant funded by the GLRS Reserve. Comments or questions? Moving on. Okay, we'll go to 4.7, $91,320 for business systems analysis staffing costs funded by the GLRS Reserve. Okay, we'll move to 5. The Council approves the following grants for 2023. 5.1, $24,750 for Fort Erie Alliance Senior Citizens Complex. Comments? 5.2, $35,448 for business area watering. Comments? 5.3, $28,853 for Beachcomber Senior Complex. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I may be somewhat out of order because I'm just wondering how these amounts are determined, because I'm familiar with the Fort Erie Lions Senior Citizen Complex, and I'm actually a member, so should I be declaring a conflict?
You're on the committee?
No.
You remember the senior citizens?
I play cards there. To play cards, you have to be a member. So
You have to make that determination.
well, I don't really think I'm going to benefit one way or the other, but I'm just wondering how the amounts are determined for any of the senior complexes. Is it based on the membership? Is it based on the request? Is it based on a budget they submit?
Can you help me with that one, Jonathan?
Yeah, I believe there's supporting documentation for that one in the package as well for council. When it comes to any grants we're authorizing under the Seniors Act in Ontario, there is a calculation for that. I'm just trying to see if I have it at my fingertips here, but I believe in that case there should be something in your package as well. Yeah, the Seniors Active Living Centers Act 5B, there's a reference to a the municipality contributing 20% towards operations. So I believe we have a copy of their budget, submitted budget, and then the town's contribution towards that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? So we'll move to 5.4, 23,500 for community events. Anyone on that one? Okay. And we'll move to 5.5, $1,593,576 for the Border Republic Library. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, again, with more of my comments this evening. I'm just going to echo what I said earlier about the Fort Erie Public Library. Of all the budget items that we have, I think this one provides probably the best return on investment. There's some statistical data available from the Ontario Library Service. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but I think it was for every dollar that a municipality spends on their public library system, it returns around $3 to $4 back in savings elsewhere in the community. So even though this is one of our largest items on here, this is the one with probably the biggest return on investment. So again, the library is an important institution, so I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to speak positively of them, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to point that out.
Anyone else? And we'll move on to part 6. Boy, we're rocking now. The council approves the following 2023 business improvement areas, BIA levies. So we started out with 6.1, 40,700 for Bridgeburg Station BIA. Comments or questions? Seeing none, 30,000 for Crystal Beach BIA. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make some comments. I was very happy to see in the last year the Crystal Beach BIA increase their levy from around 15,000 to 30. It's been a long time in the making, but never did I ever really think that we would get there. And I think that it's great to see the progress that the BIA is making in the West End, and in particular Crystal Beach. But I'm excited to see their plans for the future, because I know they are looking at aggressively bringing that number up to a much higher number year over the next few. And I just wanted to make some comments on how happy I am to see a BIA that came into force only a few years back, now increasing their levy to something quite substantial.
Right. 35,000 for Ridgeway BIA. Are you on board with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am, very much.
Okay. So we'll move to part 7, that council amends the 2023 capital budget as per Appendix 2 to report CBC 01 2023 to substitute $262,500 of water refurbishing reserve funding from the Ridgeway Road water main replacement project, and $41,615 of water refurbishing reserve funding for the Bellevue Boulevard water main replacement project with the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund formula-based grant increase of $304,115. Anybody on that one? Okay, so we'll move to the next one. The council amends the 2023 capital budget to include the 6 Mile Creek flooding project, SMC F23, for $500,000 with debenture funding. Your worship.
Yeah, I wonder if we get some clarification on A, what this money will be utilized for, and B, when we would anticipate we'd have to debenture.
Okay, so Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the $500,000 is split between class environmental assessment, which determines the optimum solution or the preferred solution for addressing the flooding issues in and around 6 Mile Creek. And I've earmarked another $250,000 in there for the beginning of detailed design. Jonathan can speak to when the debenture would occur, but you'll notice in the, if I may, the capital sheet for this, that there's a substantial amount of money for debt for construction later on. Unfortunately, we don't have a checkbox for grants or other funding right now, so rather than peg it on the stormwater refurbishing reserve, we've just earmarked it as debt right now. That is not firm by any means.
Yeah, through you, Chair. The asset is something that's new. So as I noted during our presentation, we have proposed it for debt funding. We would otherwise consider storm refurbishing reserves for this, but actually this is an example where we've done a lot of work to have an annual contribution to that reserve, but this additional project would bring that reserve to a negative balance. Even the $500,000 that's being recommended for this year, if we reserve funded that, it would bring the storm reserve to negative. So we would forecast all 3.5 million of that project for debenture issue following 2025 estimated construction completion, and the operating impacts would come on board both in 25 and 26 for the full principal and interest impacts of that. Our policy or our guidance with grants is we don't rely or budget and forecast grants unless they're reasonably assured. So in this case, there are a number of programs we would hope to take a look at and apply for in relation to something like this, but because at this point it's expected it would probably be an application process, so until it's more reasonably assured, we would rely on debt.
Is that good, Your Worship?
Yes, it is, thank you.
Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I'm just wanting some clarification in regards to the project itself. Are we talking about the Shirley Road project, or are we, okay, so that's the extent of that we're not talking about anywhere on 6 Mile Creek other than the Shirley Road area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the issue is to address flooding as a result of 6 Mile Creek flowing backwards during big storm events. So
Okay, so
whatever
it
is
is
affected by that. Primarily it's Shirley Road.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so we'll move to the council amends the 2023 budget to include a town hall renovation second floor project for $75,000 with funding from the facilities maintenance reserve. Anybody? Okay, we'll move on to the next now. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Noyes? You normally had that hand up much quicker.
Well, because it doesn't really fit. I have another that. That's not on that, before you get to the number 8 that. So, and I did briefly, and I'm hoping this is where I'm supposed to be bringing it up, is that the council amends the 2023 capital budget to defer the Fort Erie Tennis Club allocation of $150,000 to 2024.
Wait a minute.
Is this the proper place to put it?
Yeah, on a point of order, that's not the proper
Yes.
place.
Well,
This is the levy, that was the capital budget.
That was the capital budget.
Okay, but we're amending the capital budget now.
You're right. We have included 3 other capital amendments, so this would be the place, I suppose, if any, that we would consider that, if we are to amend the capital budget tonight.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So what is it you wish to do?
To defer the Fort Erie Tennis Club pickleball court until next year.
Okay.
And take it out of this year's budget.
That's a motion that you're making?
I think I need a seconder?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, and just the motion is now on the floor. Can I comment on it now?
Yep.
Okay. And again, it's for me, it came out of left field. I didn't see it. I did bring it up both times. I had some questions. I thought we were going to get more information. But the fact that even in the land committee minutes, there were still some questions about the membership and the pickleball court and what they were asking for, and that we were going to be looking at that for 2024. I think we should probably defer spending any money on the pickleball court until we have answers to those questions that the land committee had. So I would want to make sure that if we're going to put this kind of money into a pickleball court, that it's open to the general public, not restricted to Fort Erie tennis members only. And on top of that, and I mean this in the nicest way, Councillor McDermott, and because on one side of the road, we're putting a substantial amount of money into Sugar Bowl, supported 100%. Just down the road, not very far, we're putting millions of dollars again into Oaks Park. Douglas Park, supported 100%. I think we have to sometimes maybe pull back a little bit for putting yet another investment in that same little area. I do think that it probably down the line will need it, but I think right now with all those questions up in the air in regards to the Fort Erie Tennis Club status and everything else, we should just defer it till next year.
Councillor Lewis, you good with that? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with where Councillor Noyes is coming from, and I raised a very similar concern during the capital budget, because I wouldn't have been in favor of funding an operation that is not open to all taxpayers of Fort Erie if we use Fort Erie taxpayer money to do it. During the capital budget, there was some discussions about when the money would be spent, how it would be spent, and at that time I received and I was confident in the assurances of staff that there would not be any spending of this money until we had an agreement that actually satisfied the requirements of access and other issues. So I understand where Councillor Noyes is coming from. I completely agree with what she's saying, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. I am just concerned that if we amend this now, if we do get a satisfactory agreement with the tennis club that provides access to residents, we may be depriving town staff of the flexibility to enter that agreement and get this funded for the benefit of residents. With regard to the different areas of town, I know where she's coming from as well with that, but sometimes, you have a situation where some years the roads all deteriorate in one section of town. Like Ward 1 may have all their roads repaved one year. It's not because everything is being poured into Ward 1 or Ward 2 or Ward 3 on any given year. It's just that's where the need was. And then the following year, you may find that ward doesn't have any needs, and it could be Ward 4, 5, or 6 that has the need. So I wouldn't want to make decisions based on that. But I entirely understand where she's coming from, and I hope that we can get that agreement. I just don't want to deprive staff of that flexibility if we do get an agreement that would benefit town residents. I think if we can get that facility open, I think that would be a requirement for us to fund it. I'm not prepared right now to pull this out because we may have a satisfactory agreement. Better to spend the money now before inflation and interest rates get too out of control. So that's my thought on that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Your Worship?
Yeah, last, 2 nights ago, we dealt with the Land Committee minutes, and the minutes said that we're extending the current lease for 1 year to allow us an opportunity to deal with all these issues that arise out of the current lease that the tennis club has. Some of the issues are pretty hefty. Exclusive use, public access, consistency with the current model that we have throughout. The chances of us getting this done this year within a time frame where we could do any work on this court, I think are probably slight. I did speak to, after speaking with Councillor Noyes, I did speak with Ms. Hanson, who tells me that with courts going in, pickleball court going in at Douglas Park on Bertie Street, there will now be, I think, 5 that we have put in across the town, so that I don't know, this court isn't currently being used, so I don't know that deferring it to 2024 is a particular challenge or issue, because I think the issues about how that facility is used are very serious, and I don't think we're going to get them done, as I said, very quickly. So I don't have a problem supporting this. We're not taking it off the table. We're simply deferring it till next year. So I'll support it. I hear what Councillor Dubanow was saying. I put my hand up, though, originally to say that I've never, in all the years that I've been the mayor, allocated capital dollars based on who got this, who got that, who got the next one. So I think you're in choppy waters there, Councillor Noyes, on that.
Councillor Noyes?
And I think I tried to defer that at the beginning, like explain that I have no problem with the other developments going on, but at some point you have to kind of step back and say, okay, you know, this was, and again, this came out of left field. This came, as far as I'm concerned, this came out of, we were talking about Sugar Bowl Park for years. We've been talking about Douglas Park for years. We've been talking about a dog park, still don't have, for decades.
Okay.
But yet the Fort Erie Tennis Club suddenly becomes a priority. So I'm not trying to put one ward against another, but I'm just saying this, you know, let's look at this next year with some of the other challenges. And again, I support all the development. And with COVID, everything had to be put on hold and everything had to back up. And I appreciate that. But again, to me, this came out of left field. Thank you.
And with all due respect, Oaks Park is also getting some things like fencing for the parking lot area this year because of some of the damage done by too many home runs being hit from the senior diamond. It's also getting netting across to protect the little players from getting hit by a Wiglar's home run. And it's also getting lights for the senior diamond. So it's not that things aren't being done, they are. So if I understand this correctly, and I know the meeting goes long here, the motion was to defer this until?
Well, the motion was to remove it from the 2023 capital budget.
Okay.
To be reconsidered in 2024
That's not, no, that isn't.
Okay, to defer to 2024, whichever way you want to put it, it's fine with me.
Okay, so let's go with your original motion. Give it to me one more time.
Okay, remove.
I hate to quote Britney Spears on a night like this, to be honest with you, but go ahead.
Council amends the 2023 capital budget to remove, to defer the Fort Erie Tennis Club $150,000 pickleball renovation or creation, because I don't think it is a pickleball yet.
Okay. So there's the motion. There's no further comments? All in favor? Carried.
You get to vote against?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other things to pop up before I go to Jonathan because I have to go back to him. We'll have to take a couple of minutes so I can get the new numbers here. Okay?
I have them.
You have them already?
Yep.
Gosh, you're good. Okay, Jonathan, lay it on me.
So for Part 8, it'll be amended to be that council approves the 2023 general levy of, and pardon me as I switch back and forth here, $31,339,160. And again, just as a way of note, that is just to remove, or sorry, not to remove, but to general levy reserve fund the item number 3.3 for the parking bylaw enforcement officer position, comprised of a base budget of, and that's unchanged, $30,786,050, and a supplementary budget of $553,110, sorry. I was on the wrong. $553,110. And approves the 2023 general capital budget of, and in this case, I suppose the one matter of administration is I'm not sure whether or not that tennis club amendment was from our preliminary approval or general. But for now, let's just assume that it was in our general capital budget approval. So who wants to do, I didn't figure that one out, but if who wants to do the quick math on 16 million?
I think it's 15,880.
There you go. $15,880,689. It was $150,000, correct? And direct staff to submit the related bylaws.
Did you get all that? The last number was?
$15,880,689. Pesky CAO. $15,880,689.
All in favor? Carried. So we'll go to part 9. Council excludes capital asset amortization of 7.3 from the 2023 general operating budget. Comments or questions? All in favor? Okay. I think it goes back to you, Darren, first, doesn't it?
No, Councillor McDermott, remember we had to do
Oh, yes. we have to
CBC
go back.
05. Oh, we have to vote on the budget as amended.
Okay, that's right. So we all know what that is, so can we move on to the next one? All in favor? Chair. You want that?
No, I'll move CBC 05 2023.
The council receives report of the CBC 05 2023 regarding the analysis of the 2022 assessment for the 2023 taxation year for information purposes.
Yep.
Thank you, Worship. All in favor? Am I done now, Your Worship?
Guess you're not interested in debate or discussion. Okay, yes. You're handing it back?
I just, one thing, and I just want to thank Jonathan for all the hard work he's done there. You know, when we're all in these weird positions like politicians get into, when you're looking at 7 and 9% budgets and you're coming to work thinking, holy mackerel, how are we going to do this? How are we going to manage this? And we're like anybody else. If we didn't have the professionals like Jonathan, who is studious at making sure that our dollars, his dollars, very important. And the work that he'll do, the little bit above. You might sigh a little bit when you're doing it, when you're asking for things, but you know what? We got the best treasurer in Niagara, if not all of Ontario, and we should appreciate the fact that we have. And I just want to, tell people that, we don't create the magic here. We don't. It's the people that are behind us that create the magic, and then we have to make that work. And everybody's job is just as important as anybody else. But without them, there is no magic. And sometimes, when you get in positions like this, and just getting over COVID, and we have to make these tough decisions, man, some nights, I know I can't sleep. Some nights I just roll all night. And I always wonder how this one was going to go. I'm quite happy with it because the fact that everybody's engaged tonight, it's not always the case. And it's probably the best budget meeting I've attended since I've been there. So, I think the taxpayers should be grateful that we have the back. And when you look at the increase, aside from the transit, it's a pretty low increase. And we've been pretty consistent about that for years and years and years, well, at least that I can remember. So I'm very appreciative of what Jonathan does here because you can never underestimate the job he does.
Yeah.
Back to you, Your Worship.
Councillor McDermott, those are very appropriate comments. I know it's not just Jonathan, it's all the senior staff that he has to work with, all of the staff that work for him, including Jillian, who's at the back there.
Yes.
They do a remarkable job. We're quite fortunate. I know that you have to arm wrestle him periodically during the course of the year to get these numbers down, but the thing that I think is particularly important is we've just come through a pandemic. We're faced with inflation that's much higher than 4.5%. We've tried to utilize the revenues from growth to address a number of issues. And one of the things that I think is important is that we've been able to maintain the lowest tax burden in Niagara for our residents, while at the same time making sure that we've got infrastructure that we can manage and renew without further unexpected costs down the road. We are far, far ahead of every municipality in Niagara, including the region, on asset management. Some of them we are miles ahead of. And so, as we all know, that chart that shows the combined taxes and the water and sewer rates, we're still number 4 in the region, but we've been coming down every year, and we will be coming down further. I did point out that one of the challenges with respect to any type of amalgamation, even if it were the amalgamation of the water and sewer systems in Niagara, is that our residents would be picking up the costs of upgrading the water and sewer treatment facilities, pumping plants, and mains for the region, which has a billions of dollars infrastructure gap, as well as the cost of all the municipalities that also have substandard infrastructure. We would be subsidizing that in order to bring that up. So that's a bit of a scary proposition. We should be, and I don't know that our residents fully appreciate that. Jonathan went to great extents to make sure that this opening of the envelope on our budget to fund the new transit commission was as transparent as possible. For our residents, we're the 4th largest transit provider in Niagara, so it's 3.63%. Welland, it's 7%. Niagara Falls, it's 10%. St. Catharines is 13%. Their budgets will be, maybe Welland's is similar to ours. The others probably nowhere near as transparent. So I think we also need to thank staff for that. And of course, all of you, because I know that all of you have, from time to time, provided information and input as to your thoughts with respect to this budget. Once we get the strategic plan in place, Councillor Lewis, as you know, that's what will drive future budget expenditures, and so we'll be embarking upon that shortly. So I want to thank all of the staff, Jonathan, you and everyone behind you, all of the senior staff, and the members of council for getting us through this very challenging budget year. And I know, Jonathan, you somewhat forecast 2024. We'll deal with 2024 when we get there.
Indeed.
So we won't have a budget meeting next Wednesday. There is a special council meeting, as Councillor Noyes had alluded to. And Councillor Dubanow, would you like to adjourn?
Yes, Your Worship, I would like to adjourn the budget meeting, move that we adjourn the budget meeting at 8:53 p.m. this evening.
All in favor? Yes. Carried.